is Spectrum.
Alternative medicine, homeopathy, secrets, society, hypnosis, the paranormal, alternative energy, UFO, abduction, the weird, the wild, and the wonderful.
With your hosts, Tom Theophanous and Scott Jordan.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Spectrum Radio Network on BBS Radio 2. I'm Scott Jordan here, my co-host, Tom Theophanous, and remember, there's no such thing as too much information. Hey, Tom, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Scott, how you doing?
There's that recorded, hey, Tom, how you doing thing coming up.
Yeah, it always is.
What do we got tonight?
Well, tonight we have a special guest. His name is Michael Tsarion. He was born in Northern Ireland and is an expert on the occult histories of Ireland and America. He has made the deepest researches into Atlantis, the origins of evil, and the Irish origins of civilization. He is the author of the acclaimed books Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, Astro-Theology and Sidereal Mythology, and the Irish origins of civilization. He is the producer and presenter of the Origins and Oracles DVD series that explores the ancient mysteries and forbidden knowledge, and he's also the producer of the Architects of Control DVD series. And tonight, we're going to be discussing symbol literacy and the age of manipulation. Welcome to our show, Michael.
Welcome, Michael.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Michael, he did warn us that
I'm back. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
I thought we lost you there for a sec.
No, I can hear you now.
No, sorry about that. You're having a little trouble with your internet today.
Yeah, we've had a bit of trouble with the weather and everything, but thanks again for the invitation. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and I'm glad to have you. Okay, maybe we could start out just for those people, 2 or 3 people on the planet who haven't heard of you. Just a quick bullet point on how you got interested in looking into these fields.
That's been for a long time. Started back in Ireland and then picked up steam heavily in the States. The original work was commenced around about between 1979 and 82. It was very much in the dark. I was just looking at things in the broadest outlines. And then when I hit the States, where they have more research material, and then they have a lot of great researchers like Eustace Mullins and G. Edward Griffin and others, it picked up some steam then. And then certainly in the 90s, around about the time of Desert Storm, almost at the beginning of Desert Storm, then things got very heavy, start studying in greater detail the whole matrix of control. It was many stages. I think the original questions started to form for me in Britain, in Ireland, but the answers were very far and few between, and it just took a lot of dedication and continual digging into these subjects. Again, mostly in the States, because that's where they have the bookstores, that's where they had the more seasoned researchers. There's a very few of quality in Europe, but at that time, it was really an American thing where you could pick up books and listen to people explaining basically what was going on. Some of those people put the focus a lot on the Americas in particular, and the rise of the federal orgs. But what really had intrigued me was that various experts in this field, including the ones I just mentioned, and also, say, for instance, Dr. John Coleman and even Lyndon LaRouche and his team, they started to allude to the whole British matrix of control. And that very much intrigued me because, of course, coming out of Britain, this rang true. And I knew that a lot of the people who were reading their works didn't get that, didn't understand the incredible significance of the role of the British government or the British oligarchical system in America. But for me, it was immediate, bells went off right away. And that got me intrigued because being Irish, we know all about colonialization and all about these kinds of machinations. And then I just couldn't believe it that the same forces basically were seeking to undermine the Americas. And then that's when my journey really started to get much more passionate into this, and the pieces started to slowly to fall together. And that's also the same with symbolism, because that's what I was doing back in the 80s. Was my initial interest in all of this came around because of basically the symbolism aspect.
The symbol literacy aspect.
Definitely.
Maybe we can drill down into that. Symbol literacy. Where did you start coming across that? I remember you saying that you were getting magazines at an early age, and you kept seeing the same symbols over and over and over again, and that intrigued you.
It did. At that point, it soon moved on from there into television, watching the graphics,
Right.
looking mostly at the kind of rock and roll, or even the new wave, or the kind of punk. This is like late 70s into the 80s, watching the incredible graphics and the weird symbolism. Now we know it because since my work, there's been a huge, absolute tidal wave of this kind of work being done by people on YouTube and everything. So with the Lady Gagas and what have you, people are kind of up to speed on this.
Exactly, yeah.
But back then, it was like pulling teeth. If you tried to say, why did Duran or The Cure, why are they using that symbolism? I mean, that's pretty much necrophiliac right there, or that's Kabbalistic, or that's alchemical. I mean, it was just like, what? It went right over people's heads, and they thought I was boogaloo, But actually, I just persisted, and then from there it went into the architecture to discover the alignments, the ley lines. I can't say exactly when it started, but it was something that did intrigue me to understand that, yes, there was these recurrent symbols. Later on, I found out that a lot of these are secret society symbols. That, again, didn't happen right away, but slowly it started to show me that basically, in a nutshell, the kind of control that is operating in the world, one of the reasons why people just shake their heads, one of the reasons why it is unseen, one of the reasons why there's resistance, is because it is absolutely unseen. And so in one way, you can kind of understand it when people just don't want to know and they think you're crazy, because I started to realize that architecture of control is, in fact, unseen. It deals with color, it deals with number, it deals with rhythm, it deals with the use of light, it deals with these esoteric and more exoteric symbolism. And that's why it passes people by in exactly the same way as the motifs, say, in the architecture of a church or a college or a university. People walk on it every day, walking on checkered floors, without the faintest idea that that's a symbol going back to, say, the Templars, the Cistercian order. They live their whole life and never wonder why they walk on that checkered floor as they cross the quadrangle to go into their classes to be indoctrinated. And then I suddenly realized, well, wait a minute, it's not just these British colleges or these ones in Dublin and Belfast. You come to the United States of America, there's the same colonial architecture. There's exactly the same motifs.
You mentioned this stuff about architecture. If you say the name Fulcanelli to people, a vast majority of people say who?
Yeah, or Vitruvius or Pico della Mirandola, all these great names. Maybe Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, sure, maybe Raphael, you get a bit of a, like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. But the moment that you go a little bit, more than that, into names that are very, very important for our world, then they're lost. Most people couldn't even tell you who designed Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia. This kind of thing started to irritate me when I was in America, because I couldn't believe it, that people did not know what the government symbols meant, that they didn't know that they were Judaic or that they were British Israelite. They didn't know that they were Egyptoid. They didn't look at the dollar bill and have any suspicions about any of these Masonic orders or these fraternities. It was complete and utter ignorance, pretty much wall to wall. And I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't have actually persisted and then did find the literature, which was a salvation for me, because I needed answers and I needed them quick. And I wasn't getting them from anybody that I was bumping into at all.
Right. Other than, you bumped into Jordan Maxwell. And
that's
that
later.
Oh, yeah, okay. This was much earlier, was it? Okay.
This is certainly a few years later in America, and much earlier when the questions were formed. And don't forget, you see, all this time I'm just working retail. It's wonderful to go and browse these bookstores, and then you look at the prices of the backs of the books, and you're thinking, hold on here.
Yeah, I know.
You're not going to be able to afford a very decent library, and these bookstore owners looking down their nose at you don't really want you to be sitting there for 5 hours in your Motorhead T-shirt browsing their books and greasing up their store. So you're in a paradox, because now it meant for me, specifically for me, it meant that I did spend the money. I actually worked as hard as I could and spent every single dime that I could have, on the literature, because it was an absolute treasure to have. And I realized how precious it was to be in the States and to be having access to these books. So I wasted no time, because I actually have a long history of animosity with bookstores in Britain. So by the time I got to the States, and it's not really as bad as I was making out, with the bookstore owners there, but I really, really realized this is my moment. I've got to get my hands on this stuff now. And one thing led to the other. And then I literally became sort of my own little expert, in a way, if you want to call it that, into esoteric books and into rare books. One thing just developed, and I started to know where to go and get the books, which ones were sort of, fraudulent and which ones had great information. So I started then to spend as much money as I could and collate and get together some of these prize works, which then has now, of course, stood me great, because those have become the bedrock of the research that I've done and that I've put into my works and then offered to the world at large, these sources and references. So it did actually, it turned out to be a benefit. At the time, there was no motive and there was no desire to do anything with it. So I didn't have that clue at the time that this was going to have a payoff or anything like that, or I'd suddenly, tomorrow I'd be on radio and TV. None of that ever was even in my consciousness, nor was it a desire, but it was just simply a love of the work and getting to put these pieces together to understand what on earth was going on in the world.
Do you find that you're a perfectionist in the way that I remember seeing snippets of the Origin and Oracles series, 22 DVDs, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And I thought, wow, he must really put a lot of thought into this. And it seems to be coming from a perfectionist point of view, that once you've gathered all of this information, you thought, well, nobody's really putting this information out there exactly the way I would put it out if I was to put it out. Therefore, I must put it out. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. What happened was that I must say, and I don't mean this in any sort of flippant way, every single thing that's happened in my life, but for our purposes, since I started anything professional, was accident. Okay. It was never planned or anything like that. Jordan pushed me to continue. I mean, doing things behind my back to put the word out about me and things like that. And other people did the same thing. The Atlantis book, was the same. Somebody said that they were going to, a friend of mine said, if you put it together in more of a book form, they'll be happy to edit it for free. And then they kind of coerced me to do that. So, and then I had when you just mentioned the Origins and Oracles series, that was based on basically Joseph Campbell. He was one of my great heroes. And when I came to think, how am I going to present all this esoteric knowledge that I've been studying all these years? I think I was actually either watching his famous series, because again, here we are in America. That's on you can find channels in which they just completely replay, or at least they did in those days. The Joseph
PBS,
Campbell,
right?
Yeah, PBS, yeah. So I don't know if I was sitting down watching it, or I had some of his tapes, and even if I didn't, it was so fresh in my mind. I've always loved his work. So that kind of gave me a little bit of an understanding of how to present it. Just get a studio, just stand there or sit there and just babble away, do your thing and do it in that kind of style. And it worked. It really did work, because
it does, yeah.
It came out great. So I wouldn't say that I'm a perfectionist, but what I am is I'm that guy in the field, the soccer field, that when you get the ball, I'll just go right out the stadium door and with it. Once I've got it in my hand, I'm just going to run and run and run with it. So I'm more like what you would call dogged or just persistent and tenacious. I don't think it's really perfectionism, really.
Okay.
To others, it may seem that way. To me, it's just more like when I get my head into something, I can't let it go.
And you'll run with it all the way. I remember Joseph Campbell's series on PBS in Canada, and I remember seeing it one time, and then they were going to replay it again. And I went out and I bought a whole bunch of VHS tapes.
Yeah.
And the next time it came on, I stayed up and taped the entire series, just because it impacted me. I mean, that man was, I thought he was a guru. I hung on his every word. The stories he would tell, and he's looking at it from a nonlinear sense.
Yeah, he did a multi-length series called, I think, Transformations of Myth Through Time. I watched that a lot. It took me quite a few years to even get a videotape machine when we were living in the States. And so I missed being able to tape it myself. So I just used to catch it on PBS, like you say, and watch it as much as I could. And then I think rented a couple of the videos. And in Ireland, they had shown the series that he did with Bill Moyers, and we used to catch that every time it came on. Things like that were very rare in the late 80s, where the Thatcherite government had completely crushed all spiritual or mystical type of television. They have a lot of the pseudo stuff that they got in plenty, but the real meat was very lacking. So when Campbell's work came on British TV, we caught those. We listened to those assiduously. I think a friend of mine taped them. And then when I got to the States, I continued. That was definitely in my mind. Because remember, one thing about Campbell was his work is syncretic, like mine is. It's eclectic. There's so many different disciplines that you have to bring together. So without having listened to him, I don't think I maybe would have been able to do it, because my work is distinctive because it is also very, very eclectic. How do you bring all those pieces together? So I really lucked out there by being familiar with his work, and then had a bit of a more confidence to say, yeah, I can do that. I'll bring all these pieces together and I'll put my little storyline to it. And then all of a sudden it was extremely successful, which it wasn't planned at all. It completely was unplanned that it would be in any shape or form successful. That wasn't even the plan when I made it. Can't emphasize that enough. It was just more to try and get the information out. DVDs hadn't even been around that long, as a matter of fact. So the medium was even quite new, and certainly new to me. But it worked out fantastic, and people really dug what I was doing. Right.
Tom, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, Michael, when you sort of started in this, did you start with a particular area specifically, or you just were all over the place?
No, there was a couple that really had my interest. One was this subliminal content that you find in the billboards, that you find in the magazines, and then, as I said, on the TV videos of and I don't mean just the musical videos. I mean the graphics that they'll have before news programs, umpteen commercials, all of that stuff that I've worked with ever since. That, for some bizarre reason, did fascinate me. And then it moved from there into the architecture of Britain, and I must add to that also the phenomena that of Earth zodiacs, or any type of old megalithic structures, that exist out there, like the Glastonbury zodiac and the Kingston zodiac and what have you. It started to move into that field as well. So it was mostly that. It was mostly the sacred geometry, the ley lines, a bit of numerology and the divination arts tying into the symbolism. This was certainly the bed of it all. This is from which everything else grew. My studies on Atlantis all grew out of my interest in Irish mythology and so on. So it basically, all of the seeds were planted in that place, in that time, just hanging out in Ireland and studying. I was on the dole, of course, at that time. No hope of getting any jobs there, At that time, it was awful, And so it was just a matter of trying to eke out an existence and open your eyes, open your eyes to what all this symbolism is. And the one good thing about Britain is that symbolism is everywhere. So you have no shortage of it.
Easy to find, easy to find.
Very easy to find, yeah. And then
out of curiosity, yesterday I was watching a couple of videos on Atlantis and some of the ideas of where Atlantis may be. Have you got any thoughts onto that as to where?
Oh yeah, I concur with these latest findings. I think I wrote that on the forum. I've always said that it was in the Atlantic. That in fact, most consensus is that it is in the Atlantic at some area. And so these latest findings, I would conclude, are Atlantis. They're spot on. And I've been predicting that for years. Even in the introduction of the Atlantis book, I talk about that many of the revelations pertaining to man and his ancient history and his past will be discovered in the following 10 years. And that book was written in 2002.
Oh, okay.
So, we're practically, coming up in the 11th hour where enormous discoveries are going to be made. They are being made every month. And this new discovery, where they actually have now conclusively found Atlantis, it's really makes me feel very inspired. You know, it's right on that timeline. It's right in that chronology of which I spoke. And if anything, the legends that I'm familiar with always said that it was up there in the Atlantic, more in the northern part of the Atlantic, where the British Isles and even Iceland would have been. But even if they're finding land masses even south of that, it's good to go. It's all part of that.
Actually, one of the shows that I was watching yesterday was these fellows that were out in southern Spain, but on the Atlantic side, like beyond Gibraltar there, in one of the areas where there is like a swamp, a very old swamp, and they had some aerial photographs of possibly what, you know, the description of Atlantis was.
Yeah, that's a little... That, to me, that's a little bit too far south, because in the ancient legends they talk about at least 5 islands or 5 archipelagios or 5 continents even that have sank. And early Celtic mythology talks about Lyonesse, which is somewhere between Britain and France that sank. This is an island. There's a place called Tyrrhenia, and that's similar to Mediterranean. So in the Mediterranean basin, they think there's a sunken continent there, which is often mistaken for Atlantis. There's Oceania, which is and Beringia. You know, so there's a whole lot of these continents, and there's probably more that have disappeared beneath the waves and have been given the name just simply ubiquitously Atlantis. So anytime anybody sees any like stonework or pillars underneath the water, and maybe it's for publicity, I don't know, or maybe it's just pure enthusiasm, they always say it's Atlantis. And that's a little bit misgiven, because actually Atlantis was a real place and it existed in one location. But that doesn't mean that there
but it wasn't an island, right? It was a sort of a continent, wasn't it?
That's what it's meant to be, but again, that could be wrong. But again, yeah, you're right to say that, because most of the scholars say that it was a large land mass. And I even go so far as to think that it actually included England and Ireland and Iceland and Greenland. I believe that those are actually remnants of Atlantis. Atlantis was once attached to those lands.
Right.
But Plato's description, though, of how the thing looked like, though, the city, how it looked like. You know, now they also say that, you know, that what they found in the island of Crete looks, you know, a lot like it as well.
Yeah, I personally have no belief that Atlantis was in the Mediterranean. There is a continent there, or there is an island there, some sort of perhaps outpost of Atlantis or another civilization that sank, that's Sardinia and Syracuse and Crete and all of the Cretan. There's something there under the water, no doubt about it, but I think it's a little bit misgiven. But then you know as well as I do that these archaeologists, the moment that they raise the flag and say it's Atlantis, then they're going to get their budget.
Right,
so
there you go.
In many ways they have to, and it's media attention galore, don't forget. So I can understand it, you know. But I mean, it's getting a little bit like the Marx Brothers. Is it here? Is it there? Is it here? Is it there? It's in Bolivia. No, it's in Canada. It's over. You know, come on, it's going to be in one place. But everybody wants to, like Indiana Jones, say they have discovered it and they've discovered Atlantis. So some people put the cart a little bit before the horse, you know.
That's true.
But really, when you think about it, though, if you know the Greeks in those days and their knowledge of, you know, whatever the known world was. It hadn't gone past Gibraltar, so it most likely would have had to have been, you know, close enough, you know, even if it was in the Atlantic, somewhere in that vicinity, within reach of whatever boats they had.
That's a very good point. And of course, one, you know, I never say that I'm right in any of this. We're all trying to study and discover this together. You're right to a point, because of course Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, was completely, you know, out to lunch when it came to places a little bit too far away from Greece. He was hopeless. So you're right. There was a terrible insularness. They were good in some respects, but in many others, when it came to far-flung lands, they were hopeless, you know, in describing those places. At the same time, then one has to say, well, wait a minute. That could be mitigated against the fact that Plato's father, Solon, had gone to Egypt. So there, even though some of the historians were not as good as what you have today or in later periods of history, at the same time they did have an ancient archive that probably we don't have access today because of the Vatican or whoever, but might have been even these people may have actually had contact with travelers, with Phoenicians and Egyptians, you see, and all of these Cretans, who maybe also knew about more further far-flung places, because some of the evidence that is coming in absolutely shows you that some places like Egypt and Babylon were connected to the Indies and to Americas, right, and so forth and so on. Even the latest discoveries they've made now up your way in Canada about the Native American Indians coming across the Bering Strait, they've now found the tools of a far earlier group of people, just within the last couple of months, that show that the whole Indian idea is a little bit now losing steam, because they've discovered far more primitive remains, sophisticated remains of an earlier group that couldn't have come across the Bering Strait because there was no ice at the time of those findings.
So, do you think that the Europeans and the Egyptians and those type of folks and they're from the Mediterranean would have made it across the Atlantic at some point?
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that they all came from Atlantis or these other places. That's in their own legends, by the way. It's not me saying that. They say that just before and after the fall of Atlantis, there was a migration, a very hurried migration, east and west of the same peoples. And this is part of the reason why the customs and the beliefs and the motifs and even language tropes are similar in America, South America, and North America, and also you find them similar in the Indus Valley or wherever, even in Spain, as you mentioned, in Andalusia, and for instance, as far-flung places like the steppes of Russia and Ukraine, and then of course in Scandinavia and Ireland as well. So there's no doubt in my mind that there was a connection between peoples in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have a time frame in mind for Atlantis?
Yeah, I think that the worst happened around 13,500 years ago. I'm always open with the dates because new evidence is always coming in, but it seems that the consensus amongst the very highest archaeologists who have looked into this is around 13,500, massive cataclysms up until 8,000, when you even have a thing called the Bronze Age famine happening in Ireland, and the Storegga tsunami at 3,000. So from about 13,500 years ago until about 3,000 BC, that's almost a 7,000-year period. You have, over a 7,000-year period, you have nothing but volcanoes.
Upheaval,
unimaginable upheaval, all over the world, not localized, but like I say, all over the world. I have a list of them in the Irish Origins book, and I think I've been on the appendices site. I have a list of these coterminous or quite close famines, droughts, enormous upheavals, cosmological disasters, and what have you, raining down on the earth. And this was a blink of the eye ago, and that's why you find it in the mythologies, in the histories of the world, always talking about some sort of cosmological events, of great cataclysms, the moon being a different size, the earth reeling out of control, the sun rising in the west as opposed to the east. All these bizarre, almost cosmological anecdotes, which will only make sense, as Immanuel Velikovsky and others labored to show, and Commons Beaumont as well, that this only makes sense when you understand that something of an enormous nature happened. The sky turning black. I mean, it's even in the Bible where they talk about this kind of thing over and over again. And to me, it's a simplicity itself to understand. And we even see tsunamis and devastation today. Well, look, it's the same thing in the past.
Yeah, I mean, look what just happened with Japan, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that was incredible, really. And, who knows? Maybe they had nuclear plants back then, too.
I think they did. And, the thing is that with the amount of cataclysm that happened and the rising of the waters, that's the reason why the land bridges that connected these land masses we were talking about just a few minutes ago, but particularly the land masses that are between Britain and Europe and Britain and France, they're gone. They're history. They're sank beneath the waves. And I know that the elites know about those. I know they know that. It's a no-brainer because they've also taken satellite photographs in recent history of these land bridges that nobody had ever mentioned except in mythology, that a land bridge existed between Sri Lanka and India. And about 10 years ago or less, they went and filmed it from satellite, and now you can go online and look at it. But if you would have said that to anybody 20 years ago, they'd say, you're crazy. Now they've actually gone and taken photographs of it. Well, it's the same story in Britain. There was a land bridge between Britain and Norway and a continent, and also to France, and also one to Ireland. They were all connected. They look completely different than they do today.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
When do you think the deluge occurred, or roughly?
Well, there's been several. The big one was about 13,500 years ago, and then there was what might be, from a British point of view, or a Norwegian point of view, a thing called the Storega tsunami. Storega means large. Stor is large. So it was a large tsunami up in the north of Scotland towards Scandinavia. You know all those fjords that everybody raves about in Norway?
Yeah.
That's what caused it. That's one of the reasons why that land looks so jagged. All hell broke loose like cannot even be imagined. And it sank a lot of Scotland. It sank the coastland of Norway, so that you have these fjords that now appear to be the coastline. They weren't. And that happened about...
No gently sloping...
God almighty. No way. And did you know that about 2 years ago they found the exact same thing in Ireland, on the coast of Ireland, that it was land that broke away. They're all confused. All these National Geographic things, they went out on the latest ship with the latest technology to take sound, sonar, and photographs of the coastlines of the whole of north of Ireland. I think they did the whole of Ireland, and they were shocked to find evidence of cataclysm, not slow erosion. They can't even explain it. Well, it's easy to explain if they paid attention to the Beaumonts and the Velikovskys and the catastrophists who labored for years to say that this had happened. The folk tales know it. The fishwives know it. All these villages for years and years and years knew that the stuff that used to wash up, on the beaches, where it came from, or sometimes when they had a heavy storm and the tide was out, you could even see the remains of these ancient places. And in the folklore of these coastal places, it's always been known that the fairy lands are out there. Don't go near there. They're the fairy lands, the ancient ones. This is well known in Ireland and Scotland, but nobody pays that any mind. But now science is catching up and trying to tell you they invented it.
Right. They've come up with it now.
Yeah, we should bow our heads to them, almighty Royal Academy, the Royal, the Geographic Institute. Let's bow our heads in shame to them that they are going to tell us all that happened. And forget about all them unmarked graves of the maverick scholars who died in agony and poverty telling you all about it. Going against the flow, going against the establishment. Yeah, well, they're all forgotten.
Being blackballed.
You bet. And in America too, the great people there, the great mavericks, like Ignatius Donnelly and Edgar Casey and so many others I could mention.
Oh, I actually have a question about Edgar Casey that was sent in. Would you like to hear it?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Josh sends this question in. Edgar Casey had many descriptions of the Atlantean civilization. He indicated that they used the Earth energies focused through massive crystals in order to accomplish many tasks. They were able to project their senses outside of space-time and read the information present there. They were able to transmute souls from body to body, and they were able to focus the Earth's energies back in on itself as a weapon, apparently causing the Earth's crust to fracture, ending their civilization. Casey indicated that the Atlanteans were taking bodies once again. Is it possible that many of the technologies we hear being experimented on, from Montauk to Looking Glass to the HARP systems, are the very same technologies the Atlantean used? And if so, will they once again destroy this civilization if left unchecked?
Well, almost yes to almost all of that. And if he's read my Atlantis book, he'll know exactly that I concur with a great deal of that. In a nutshell, I do believe that there was super technologies in the past. I believe they were destroyed by these cataclysms. A lot of them were destroyed anyway. And that the so-called historical age, from the opening of about, 7,000 years ago, whatever, we have been slowly being nudged forward by this hidden Atlantean hand in order to do exactly what the questioner is asking there, which is to rebuild the technologies that had been lost. This is central to my entire thesis. For instance, even the anecdote about the crystals there could be no doubt about it, since how many crystal skulls have been discovered that not a single scientific institute has a clue how they were manufactured.
Right.
If you go to the ancient Irish legends, which date from about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, up in the north of Ireland, two giants who are in the stories of the sagas are meant to be, sort of evil or whatever you want to call it. They owned or ran a tower made of glass, from which they used to view the whole of the country of Ireland. They were like sort of like Sauron, and Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. They were kind of figures like that. And what do you know? What do you actually read in the Irish ancient legends, not in any fiction, but in the actual Irish legends, that they were able to monitor the entire continent of Ireland, or the entire land of Ireland, monitor it because they were receiving taxes and they were oppressing the people, with a large, what they call seeing crystal. And this seeing crystal was housed in a tower of glass on Tory Island. Now, go figure. Well, we know that 99% of the people will fling the book across the room when they hear references like this in their own legends and mythologies, because they've been brought up and they've been trotted on down in their uniforms to those schools and been brainwashed, and they do not have that independent mind, that open mind. I had it, so I took a second glance. Then I took a third glance. Then I started to ask questions, and I moved forward. But of course, we know that 9 times out of 10 people will just say, "What is this? This is Walt Disney. It doesn't make any sense." But what treasures of knowledge is there? The cauldron of life, which is capable of bringing people back to life again. The High King of Ireland with an arm made of silver. Are we talking cybernetics here? The sun god had a lance that could fly on its own, and they even called it. They even said that this lance that he had, the spear, sought out its enemies. It would fly through the battlefield and seek out its enemies, and if anyone came near it, their fingernails, their hairs would fall. Yeah,
exactly. It would move up under its own power.
That's right. Same thing. You have
anybody who came near it get radiation poison.
And then in the Mahabharata, because the question that you just read also hinted on the suppression. In the Mahabharata, when similar passages were found that not only spoke about these weapons, these heat-seeking weapons and their awesome power. I've gone into this in the Atlantis book, but also when anecdotes in the Mahabharata in India were found talking about the Vimanas, the famous flying ships.
Yep.
What happened? The British institutes that were translating those documents excised all references to that kind of thing. It was only added in later, after the British withdrawal, when Hindu Brahmin translators decided, look, let's just do justice to the book and put these back, and then the whole sump caught on fire. For many years, there was a conscious, deliberate editing process to make sure that none of the references were in those translations at the turn of the 19th century. It was only later on that they were re-put back in, and then people like David Hatcher Childress, another great American scholar and writer, people like that read them and brought that knowledge to the mainstream, brought that knowledge to us.
Yeah, and said, "Hey, this sounds a lot like flying ships. They're like UFOs that they're talking about." And the ancient Sumerians writing about Shems.
Mm-hmm.
The
Shems. Many examples of this, and the Abydos,
right?
Flower of life that nobody can explain how it's been etched. Either it's the one at Abydos or there's another one that the etching is far too deep for any physical tool to have done it. All over the world. I mean, it's unbelievable when you get into it. Like I said, the crystal skulls, these anecdotes that turn up in mythology, heat-seeking weapons, cauldrons of life, cybernetics, witchcraft, things that are now put down as being sorcery and witchcraft, but they could have been technology of a kind. All you have to do is change your settings a bit. And more intriguing, which was where my work comes in specifically, are the references to the genetics, the potential of having the genetic interference, and the technology to even interfere with the genetics of humankind, which for me opened a very, very big door.
Now, was that a difficult door to walk through? I mean, I know what you're talking about because I came across that myself, and that one was a little bit. That was a big meal to eat for me, and I started looking at all the ancient cultures and stuff, and looking at them like, you know what. That does seem to be what they're saying, that humans have been genetically manipulated.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't difficult for me because, remember, in the 1970s, you had Eric von Däniken, you had Zecharia Sitchin delving deeply into the genetics, and they wrote about it or certainly Zecharia Sitchin had written about it in connection to the gods, some sort of thing connecting to the Nephilim. A lot of things I agree with, a lot of things I don't, but they had already sort of opened the door, And then there was a brilliant author in England that's far less known, although I reference him in my work, is a man called Brinsley de la Poor Trench. Brinsley de la Poor Trench was a guy who also, I think, made more sense of the genetic thing. I took over sort of his work and adapted it and changed it because I thought he was inconsistent and off in certain areas. And I brought my research to bear. And basically after, again, 10 years more of just continual research, the pieces start to fall into play. And I presented my story in the Atlantis book. There's no doubt in my mind, personally, that they had this knowledge. There's just too many references. And remember, those are only the references that we have. What about the thousands upon thousands of books that have been destroyed? Or even, they say destroyed, but I think more like buried, taken away, sequestered.
Or destroyed via deluge. I mean, there's some research that's being done out there. I mean, it's possible, but that they found fallout residue going down in through geology, and they're marking it at around 50,000 years ago. So if there was nuclear fallout 50,000 years ago, what does that say about even previous societies to Atlantis?
Well, you asked the question about when do you think the deluge happened. In the Atlantis book, I do mention the 50,000 years ago because of that point.
Yes.
Because even though the consensus is, and I go along with the consensus just for convenience sake, 13,500 years, there is an equal body of knowledge, an equal body of findings that say it happened 50,000 years ago, and that's the date that I actually did put into the Atlantis book. So we can't. There's not enough evidence yet to decide on which one of the two, so we have to go with both. Because there was
Michael Cremo's doing a lot of work in that area too, with ancient archaeology, where they're finding stuff that is impossibly old, and being buried in the basements of the museums and not being put on display because it doesn't fit the paradigm. Therefore, it doesn't make sense. Therefore, you're not going to get to see it.
Yeah, and Michael and I have talked about this personally. I love his work. He has gone and shown that there's these artifacts that have come out of deep strata, like you said, in the geology record, far too deep down in the strata. Of course, that could be explained if there was massive cataclysms that overturned things. Then you'd find these things very deep.
That's true, yeah.
But nevertheless, again, that would still destroy the official line that don't even believe in it. That they don't even believe in catastrophe. They just say it's uniformitarian. Whether or not it was... If you're finding stuff that deep, then it doesn't matter whether it was land overturned or it was put there in the strata. That is evidence of catastrophe, no matter what way you cut it.
Yes, and it's also evidence of a possibly more advanced history than we're aware of or that we're willing to admit.
Yes, and you see the lies. This is what... Then you ask, you've been hinting several times what kept me motivated.
Yeah.
The one thing that I really get hot about, and the thing that really got me committed to this, is when I start realizing that the fact that we were not reading this information wasn't just by accident.
Right.
When I started to realize, well, how come I have to spend so much money on these books, and how come they're so hard to find, and how come this knowledge is not available to everybody, and how come we're being taught all this rubbish in school and from the official sources, finally even my slow brain started to work out, it's not an accident that that's the case. And that's what got me very, very, very intrigued and much more on the scent. Because then I started to understand there's a predator loose.
Right.
And this is a lie mechanism loose. And now you have to shift gear and not only be studying the information that you first thought you were going to be studying. Whoa, what a perfect world that would be. Nope. You now have to multitask because you got another thing to be studying, and that is this hidden leviathan of lies. So your job description has just shifted.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And now you got to figure out, well, why would they do that?
Exactly. So people think, oh, yeah, Michael, how come you were into that? Listen, I didn't sit down and plan this. One thing just led to the other. You're pulling a string. The string becomes a rope. The rope becomes a chain. The chain becomes a giant thing. What is going on here? Look, I just went fishing one day. I didn't know this was all going to happen. What am I pulling out of the darkness? One thing just led to the other. And the thing is, I just stick with it no matter how dirty and greasy and filthy it gets. You just keep on going because it's interesting. And I think it's this, to me, has always been a spiritual thing, a holy work. But then you suddenly find it's not just a mere intellectual process by which you're putting pieces together and having a wonderful time collating information. you suddenly realize there's an adversary at work, a monkey on your back, a shadow that as soon as you turn your back, somebody moved the cards. Something.
Right.
There's something going on here, right?
There's a shadow complex.
That's right. There's a whole thing going on, and then you have now more balls to juggle. You've got to face the fact that there is a conspiracy at large, and then you're into that now. You see, and then that leads on to something else, and something else, and something else. So I had no choice then but to start talking openly about this other matrix of control, not just the knowledge. I found that people were quite intrigued about the knowledge because that's nothing more than just your normal, Arthur C. Clarke, unexplained, or Ripley's Believe It or Not. You'll get a few winks. You'll get some interest if you talk about those things. But bring conspiracy to the table, and the reason why the whole human race is completely under state of mind control. That's where you get the yawns. That's where you get the silence, or that's when you get the wide eyes thinking he's crazy.
Or the snickers.
Yeah. As long as you want to talk about Bigfoot and Atlantis, you'll get your fair share of an audience.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment you want to talk about Illuminati, hidden conspiracies, and the fact that the whole human race is mind controlled into a state of almost like swinedom, slavocracy, people got to go. They're going to catch that bus.
Oh, look at the time.
Yeah, look at the time. The mall's closing.
Yeah, you're threatening my personal outlook on myself. Please don't do that. I need to go.
That's right. That's when the things get really problematic. As long as you want to entertain them with something to do with, nuclear weapons in ancient times and all that, they might give you a little hearsay, and all that. And edify us with the sagas of Arthur and the Round Table. You'll have friends.
Yeah,
you'll party.
But, if you start talking about ancient history and how we might as well get into the age of manipulation because that's basically what you're talking about. But if we're talking about the age of manipulation, we're not talking about the last 20 years, are we?
No, we're talking about thousands in the years. This is the whole thing. What happened to me is I have no problem. I'm making fun of it there, but I don't care whether people followed me or not. To me, it was absolutely imperative to carry on. I was able to make that leap that David Icke always talks about. Can you leave the square? And are you able to do it? For me, that was no problem. For other people, it is a big problem.
Can you leave the reality box?
Yeah.
Are you comfortable outside of the reality box that everybody else exists in, basically? The vast majority.
I was ever in it, so it was dead easy for me to leave it because I was never in it in the first place. And but you're right. If you start talking about Montauk, if you start talking about global satanic child ritual sacrifice groups, you're probably going to find yourself not invited to too many parties anymore. You're rating your thumb. The thumbs are down and the ratings are real low. But then that's a point where other people will give up. People go, back into the box. For me, it was like, the hell with you people. This is very intriguing, and I'm going to study it. I'm going to carry on. So that's basically what happened. More circa 1990s. Then I just started to get into that whole area and study more of the hidden matrix of control. I didn't let the other stuff go, of course. I kept on doing that, but more and more importantly, especially after Desert Storm, because a lot of things started coming out in the open as well. And not only that, but the wall coming down. Let's not forget about the so-called freedom of the Eastern Bloc and the so-called freedom of South Africa, and lots of different things were happening that we should not forget.
When in fact, a lot of that was just absorption.
Of course. You think the West would be better off because of that? Yeah. So exactly. But at least what we can say is that there was a certain political upheaval, a certain amount of awakening, So this started to become a little bit more social. It was the early stages of what we have today, which is a much more massive global awakening that's even scaring the bejesus out of the controllers.
I agree with that.
On one thing now, I find that, we always use the word mythology. How come we don't use the word history? Because when the Greeks and the Egyptians and whatever stories they had of their time, why do we consider it the stories and not part of history? That's that
establishment control. You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. And I think that it is certainly non-negotiably an establishment collegiate thing. In Irish mythology, for instance, they simply divided it. They simply divided, just put a dividing line between what they've called history, which is basically from about 500 years BC onwards, they will loosely accept as being historical, although obviously it's more from the time of Jesus Christ onwards.
Right.
But in Irish mythology, they'll concede and go back about 500. Anything before that was immediately labeled the mythological cycle, and I had problems with this. I mean,
Right. Anything that we agree with is history. Anything that impinges on our paradigm of how we believe history happened is mythology.
Yep. It's another way of pigeonholing you when you find things that are not going to fit into the establishment status quo, you know.
Yes, and then they can always answer you by saying, if you do ask a question about it, they can say, yes, but that was myth. That wasn't history. That's
and yet the same
people. You know, the funny thing is that you have, certain historians back in those days, from, let's say, 400 or 500 BC, right, that had written, and including even the time of Christ, they written stuff, and we sort of accept those as facts for the most part. And yet, other individuals that have written whatever, and any other writings that we find, we consider them myths. It somehow
Stories.
Doesn't jive.
They consider them stories, quaint stories that the ancient primitives used to explain the world around them and their social interaction with nature.
I mean, there's a limit to that, though, because, I mean, if let's say, a well-known historian had said, this is what happened during that period, and it becomes accepted as a fact, why would, a different individual that has written something in that same period all of a sudden, other than the fact saying, talking about a particular god or something of that nature, could be thought as, a storyline, yes. But how about, factual things that, they were talking about their particular times?